They thought your honesty made you weak. They mistook your sincerity for naivety, your loyalty for blindness. While you spoke from the heart, they calculated their moves. While you gave without keeping score, they kept track of how much they could take. You weren't playing a game, you were living with integrity, and they used that against you. But here's the thing, life may tolerate deception for a while, but it never honors it. Truth doesn't shout in the moment. It waits, it watches, and then it turns everything upside down. You may have been wounded by their betrayal, but you were never broken. And now, as life begins to close in on them, the consequences they thought they'd outrun are finally arriving, not because you wished them harm, but because truth always returns to finish what it started. Honesty is a moral burden and a strength. Honesty is not a convenient virtue. It is not something people choose when the path is clear and the consequences are simple. Real honesty is a weight, a responsibility that demands you tell the truth, even when it costs you something, even when it means standing alone. Most people don't understand this. They think honesty is about being right or proving a point, but it's not. It's about being rooted in something deeper than your fear of rejection or your desire to be liked. It's about choosing reality over illusion, no matter what it breaks or exposes. To be honest in a world that rewards manipulation is to swim upstream. It means carrying a moral load that others have long since put down. While they bend the truth to gain favor, to win attention, or to dodge consequences, you choose to face what is real in yourself and in others. That decision doesn't come without suffering. In fact, it often comes with rejection, betrayal, and isolation. But what many people don't realize is this: the suffering that comes from honesty is far more meaningful than the comfort that comes from lies. People who play games are trying to avoid responsibility. They dodge commitment. They deflect truth. They hide behind smiles and silent manipulation because truth demands that you confront yourself. They think they're being clever, but deep down they're afraid. Afraid to be seen, afraid to be accountable, afraid to be honest even with themselves. That's why people like you, the ones who speak openly, the ones who don't twist reality to suit your desires, are often targeted because your honesty exposes their fear. Your truth disrupts their illusion. It's not easy carrying the burden of truth. There are times when it feels unfair. You gave your heart openly while they calculated every step. You expressed vulnerability while they rehearsed what to say to gain control. And in the aftermath, you questioned yourself. You wondered if you were foolish to trust, to be real, to speak plainly when others were speaking with hidden motives. That's the weight of being honest. It doesn't just expose others, it exposes you. It lays your soul bare. And for a time, it can make you feel defeated. But here's the paradox. It's that very burden that becomes your strength, because you walked through that fire with your integrity intact. You didn't shrink yourself to fit into their lies. You didn't trade your soul for acceptance. You chose the harder path. And that decision, while painful, formed something unshakable in you. It built a character that manipulation can never imitate. You learned how to suffer with clarity. You learned how to endure without becoming bitter. And you learned that your worth was never in how others played you. It was in how you stayed true. The world doesn't tell you this. It glorifies the ones who get ahead by cutting corners. It celebrates those who play the game well. But what it forgets is that those games always have a price. Deception decays the soul. Lies rot the foundation from underneath. And eventually, the mask begins to heavy to hold. That's when life begins to turn. That's when the things they thought they got away with begin to unravel. Not because someone exposed them, but because truth doesn't stay buried forever. And you will not be the one shaken when the collapse comes, because you were never building on illusion to begin with. There's something profoundly powerful about being honest, even when no one thanks you for it. It means your identity isn't built on approval, it's built on principle. It means your peace doesn't come from being understood, but from being whole. And over time, people notice. They may not admit it, but they see that there's something different about you. They see that you carry yourself with a kind of quiet authority, the kind that can't be faked, the kind that only comes from facing reality without flinching. You may have been betrayed for your honesty. You may have lost people, opportunities, even pieces of your heart. But what you gained is far more valuable. You became someone who cannot be controlled by fear, someone who cannot be bought by flattery, someone who cannot be shattered by lies, because you already stood through the storm and refused to lie to yourself. That is the kind of strength that lasts. That is the kind of strength that turns pain into wisdom and rejection into clarity. So when you look back on the games they played, the way they twisted truth to get ahead, remember this: they were not stronger than you. They were just more afraid. They built their lives on fragile scaffolding, and now it's shaking beneath them. You, however, built something solid. It took time, it took pain, but now you are standing on a foundation that life itself respects. And that will never be taken from you. Manipulation is a temporary illusion of power. Manipulation often wears the mask of intelligence. It's subtle. It doesn't shout. It whispers. It doesn't fight openly. It maneuvers in the shadows. Those who manipulate are rarely loud. They're calculated. They smile while creating confusion. They praise while planting seeds of doubt. They know how to twist words just enough to make you question your own judgment. And for a time, they appear to win. They get what they want. They pull the strings. They make others dance to a rhythm that only they can hear. But manipulation, no matter how clever, is built on lies. And lies, no matter how carefully crafted, always come with an expiration date. There is a limit to how long you can outrun truth, a limit to how long you can deceive without consequence. What manipulators fail to understand is that every dishonest move creates a fracture in trust, in relationships, and eventually in the manipulator themselves. The more they use others, the more disconnected they become from reality. They start to believe their own illusions. And that is where the unraveling begins. When someone manipulates, they're not acting from strength, they're acting from fear. Fear of being vulnerable, fear of losing control, fear of being seen for who they really are. That's why they hide behind games. That's why they push others to feel small while making themselves seem large. They don't know how to build real connection, so they settle for control. They don't know how to stand in truth, so they construct a maze of half-truths and silent strategies. It may work in the short term, but it's only a matter of time before the mask slips. If you've ever been manipulated, you know how disorienting it is. It's not just about what they did, it's about how they made you feel about yourself. They made you question your instincts. They made you doubt your own clarity. That's the cruel nature of manipulation. It doesn't just steal your peace, it tries to reshape your perception of reality. It tries to convince you that you're the problem, that your emotions are exaggerated, that your boundaries are unreasonable, that your honesty is too much. And because you cared, because you wanted to believe the best in them, you tried to adapt. You tried to meet them halfway. But what you didn't realize at the time was that there was no halfway, only a path where you would shrink more and more to maintain the illusion of peace. Manipulators don't compromise, they only shift the game to maintain control. And the more you gave, the more they took, without guilt or reflection. But here's the hidden truth. The moment you started waking up, the moment you began to see the patterns, their power began to dissolve. Because manipulation only works in silence and confusion. It only thrives in shadows. Once you start naming things, once you start setting boundaries, once you stop apologizing for your clarity, the game collapses. It doesn't happen all at once, but the illusion starts to crack. They lose control, not because you fought harder, but because you finally stopped playing. And that's what terrifies them most. A person they can no longer control. They don't know what to do with someone who no longer responds to guilt, who no longer bends under pressure, who no longer accepts half-truths as love. When you reclaim your voice, you become the one with real power, not because you manipulated back, but because you chose truth over performance. You chose authenticity over approval. What manipulators don't understand is that every lie they tell, every tactic they use, slowly isolates them. People may not speak up immediately, but they notice. They feel the subtle tension, the unease, the emotional exhaustion that comes from constant games. Over time, the people around them begin to drift away. Trust becomes impossible. And eventually the manipulator is left surrounded by the very thing they feared all along. Emptiness. Not because people turned on them out of cruelty, but because the foundation of the connection was never real. They might look like they're thriving for a season. They might still wear the mask of charm and control, but inside, they know what they've built, and they fear the day it all catches up. And that day always comes. Life has a way of circling back, not with vengeance, but with justice. The truth they avoided begins to show up in their relationships, in their failures, in their own emotional unraveling. And suddenly, the illusion of power fades, and what's left is someone who never learned how to be real. And you may have walked away scarred, but you walked away wiser. You no longer ignore red flags just because they come wrapped in a smile. You no longer accept manipulation disguised as love. You've learned to trust your gut, to honor your truth, to speak even when your voice shakes. And that right there is real power. The manipulators lose not because someone exposed them, but because the very game they played turned inward. It hollowed out their ability to love, to connect, to grow. Their wins were temporary, yours are eternal. Because when you choose truth, when you live without pretense, when you stop negotiating your worth, life begins to rise in your favor. Not overnight, but unshakably. And that is something no game can ever replace. Time reveals the moral weight of every decision. There's a reason the truth doesn't always show up immediately. Life is not rushed. It has its own rhythm, its own way of exposing what lies beneath the surface. In the moment, deception can look like success. Manipulation can look like strategy. Betrayal can look like confidence. But give it time, and the real weight of every decision, every action, every hidden motive begins to surface. Time doesn't lie. It doesn't flatter. It simply waits. And then it reveals. When people wrong you, it rarely looks like they're losing anything at first. They may even seem to be winning. They walk away while you're still processing what happened. They move on while you're still piecing together the truth. And it's easy in that vulnerable place to believe that injustice wins, that doing the right thing only gets you hurt, that your honesty, your faithfulness, your self-restraint, it was all for nothing. But that's only because the moral weight hasn't landed yet. Every choice we make carries a cost. It doesn't always show up in the same season we plant it, but it always comes. Think of a person who lies not once, but habitually. At first, they get away with it. No one notices. People even trust them. They start building relationships, reputations, even careers on that illusion. But slowly, the burden grows. It shows up in anxiety, in the fear of being found out, in the emotional distance that comes from living inauthentically. And then, one day it all breaks open, not because someone hunted them down, but because the structure couldn't hold the weight of deception any longer. And that's what life does. It tests the foundation you build on. If you've built on truth, even if you're struggling, even if it looks like you're behind, that structure will hold. It will stand the storm. But if you built on lies, on manipulation, on betrayal, time becomes your greatest enemy, because the longer you live that way, the more unstable everything becomes. The cracks grow, and eventually the whole thing comes crashing down, not as punishment, but as inevitability. When someone betrays you, they often believe they've escaped the consequences, especially if you stayed silent, especially if you didn't retaliate. They mistake your peace for weakness, your patience for naivety. But what they forget is that life doesn't need your revenge to settle the account. Life has a way of collecting what is owed, not out of cruelty, but out of balance. The weight they placed on you, the confusion, the heartbreak, the disrespect. That weight never vanishes. It simply shifts, and one day it lands right where it belongs. People can run from truth, but they can't outrun their conscience forever. No matter how deeply they bury it, it finds its way back. Sometimes through relationships that mirror their betrayal, sometimes through the loss of trust from others, and sometimes, more painfully, through the realization that they've become someone they no longer recognize. That's the worst kind of reckoning. The internal one, the one where no one needs to say a word because the guilt begins to speak louder than any accusation ever could. The strange thing about time is that it gives both sides what they've earned. If you were honest, loyal, and sincere, even when it costs you, time will reward you with a deeper sense of peace, with clarity, and with strength. Not immediately, often not visibly, but slowly you'll find that the pain begins to work for you. It starts to shape you, to teach you, to deepen you. And what you thought was the end becomes a new kind of beginning. And for those who chose the easier road, the game players, the liars, the users, time will reveal something too. It will show them what they traded away. It will show them the relationships they damaged, the trust they lost, and the person they could have become if they had just chosen truth. That revelation doesn't always come in dramatic ways. Sometimes it's quiet, a moment of stillness, a failed connection, a season of loneliness that makes them realize the game wasn't worth it. That's why you don't need to rush justice. You don't need to chase people down or prove anything. Let time do what it does best. Let it weigh their actions and yours. Because when the scales tip, and they always do, truth will not be denied. The very thing they thought they got away with becomes the very thing that haunts them. And you're no longer carrying their weight. Time has lifted it from your shoulders and returned it to where it came from. The most powerful decisions are the ones made in silence. The decision to stay true when no one notices. to walk away without burning bridges, to protect your peace instead of demanding revenge. Those are the decisions time honors. Those are the choices that build unshakable character. And while it may seem like the dishonest have it easier, it's only for a moment. Because life isn't measured in moments, it's measured in truth. And truth, like time, never forgets. Suffering for integrity builds unshakable character. There's a certain kind of suffering that doesn't come from failure or loss. It comes from doing the right thing when it would have been easier not to. It's the pain of walking away when you could have stayed and played the same games. It's the ache of telling the truth when a lie would have saved your reputation or spared your heart. Integrity is not just about moral purity. It's about endurance. It's about standing firm while the world around you bends and shifts to fit what's comfortable, what's convenient, what's self-serving. People often associate strength with domination, the ability to overpower, to manipulate, to win at any cost. But real strength is measured by how much truth you can carry without folding. It's about how much rejection you can take and still remain kind, how much pain you can hold without becoming bitter. That's what integrity demands. Not just clean behavior, but inner resilience. And that resilience isn't born in comfort, it's forged in fire. When you choose integrity over convenience, you don't always get applause. In fact, you often get misunderstood. People think you're rigid, too intense, or too sensitive. They don't see the internal war it takes to stay aligned with your values when betrayal would be easier, when indifference would be more comfortable, and yet you stay the course, not because it feels good, but because you've made a decision about who you are, and you refuse to let circumstance rewrite your identity. That decision doesn't come without cost. You'll lose people. You'll be passed over. You'll watch others gain ground by compromising what you refuse to let go of. And in those moments, it's easy to question whether integrity is worth it. You wonder if you're just being naive, if the world actually rewards dishonesty, and if your pain is just a sign that you've made the wrong choice. But those are the exact moments when your character is being carved into something deeper, something permanent. Because the truth is, nothing in life that lasts is built without cost. Anything real must be tested, and if your strength has never been tested by loneliness, by injustice, by silence, then it isn't strength. It's just convenience that hasn't yet faced resistance. But when you suffer for integrity, when you choose the hard road again and again, you begin to form something within you that no one can steal. You build a spine that doesn't bend under pressure. You develop a clarity that no gaslighting can blur. You create a soul that doesn't rot when others decay. Integrity isolates you at first. It makes you stand apart. You begin to feel the gap between you and the people who live by convenience. They don't understand your pain, not because they're stronger, but because they've avoided the very conflicts that build depth. And sometimes that loneliness is brutal. But with time, something shifts. That isolation becomes distinction. You're no longer trying to belong where you don't fit. You're no longer negotiating your values for fleeting connection. And the relationships that do come into your life begin to match the strength you've earned. There's a kind of quiet power that begins to rise in you, not the kind that demands attention, but the kind that people feel without you saying a word. You carry presence. You walk with conviction, and the storms that used to shake you now only refine you. That's what happens when you suffer with purpose, When you stop asking for ease and start asking for alignment, many people think they can skip this process, that they can gain influence, respect, and inner peace without ever confronting themselves. But you know better. You've been through the valley. You've looked in the mirror and chosen to stay honest, even when it costs you love, approval, or status. That's a kind of victory that doesn't make headlines, but it builds legacies. You're not just surviving anymore. You're becoming someone who can't be bought, who can't be silenced, who can't be manipulated, because you've already paid the price in silence and you came out with your soul intact. Perfect. This isn't about being perfect. Integrity isn't about never falling. It's about getting back up the right way. It's about admitting your failures without making excuses. It's about facing your flaws without running. It's about taking ownership of your story, even the parts that hurt. That's what makes your character real. Not polish, but process. Not image, but substance. Eventually, life begins to align with the weight you've been carrying. You begin to attract what mirrors your depth. You stop chasing what's hollow. You stop explaining your worth. And those who once overlooked you begin to feel the loss. Not because you punished them, but because they now stand face to face with what they forfeited. Someone who doesn't just talk about truth, but lives it. So if you're in that space right now, the space where integrity hurts more than it heals, hold the line. Stay the course. The world may not reward it immediately, but your soul will. And one day you'll look back and realize that what felt like suffering was actually the shaping of a foundation that nothing and no one can shake. Life has a way of balancing the scales. It might not happen when you expect it. It might not come in the way you imagined. But life has a mysterious, almost sacred way of restoring balance. What was once out of order eventually begins to align. What seemed unfair starts to make sense. And the weight you carried for doing the right thing, even when no one was watching, eventually shifts. Not because you demanded justice, but because truth has a gravity of its own. It doesn't need to shout, it simply waits. And then it lands exactly where it's supposed to. We live in a world where shortcuts often seem to win, where deception is dressed up as strategy, where people walk away from the damage they cause and still manage to smile, thrive, and be celebrated. You see people who used you move forward as if nothing happened. You hear their names in rooms they never would have entered if not for your loyalty, your kindness, your sacrifice. And somewhere in the silence, you start to wonder if maybe life forgot to keep score. But life forgets nothing. The scales don't tip on your timeline, but they do tip. Every seed sown, whether in silence or in malice, eventually yields its fruit. There are people walking through their own private storms right now, not because someone cursed them, but because the damage they once ignored has come home to roost. The disrespect they dished out now echoes in their relationships. The lies they spun have started to unravel. They may not speak it, they may not show it, but there's a reckoning in progress, one that life delivers without applause, without warning, and without mercy. And for those who stayed faithful, who walked in truth, who bore the cost of integrity, the scale begins to shift in another way, not in sudden applause or instant rewards, but in the slow, steady arrival of peace. You begin to feel lighter, clearer. You no longer carry their weight. You stop wondering about their journey because yours is finally unfolding. You're no longer bound to the outcome of their decisions. You're finally free to live yours in truth, in strength, in clarity. Life has a way of circling back, not for revenge, but for restoration. It brings full circle the pain you thought would last forever. It takes your scars and transforms them into wisdom. It turns your silence into power. The things that once broke you now become the foundation you build upon. That's the subtle balance of the universe, that the very experience that tried to destroy you ends up being the one that rebuilds you stronger than ever. The people who underestimated you will one day see it, not through bitterness or retaliation, but through the quiet force of your growth. They'll see what they tried to manipulate rise beyond their reach. They'll realize too late that the person they once dismissed is now someone they can't touch, not because you became vengeful, but because you became whole. And wholeness is the greatest form of justice. Sometimes the balancing of the scales doesn't come through their suffering, but through your rising. You don't need to see them fall to know that justice has occurred. You just need to see yourself free, no longer held hostage by what they did, no longer shrinking in the shadows of their betrayal. That's what true justice looks like. Not just them paying, but you healing. Not just them losing, but you thriving. The irony is that many of them thought they won. They thought walking away meant power. They thought silence meant weakness. But they failed to understand that life plays the long game, that everything they took for granted, your trust, your loyalty, your patience, was something rare, something sacred, and once lost, it doesn't return. They may search for it in others. They may try to recreate it, but what's real can't be copied. It can only be earned. And they gave that up. Let them sit with that. Let life teach them what you no longer need to. The scales are not balanced by your hands. They're balanced by time, by truth, by consequences that no one escapes. And those who have caused harm without remorse will eventually come face to face with themselves. And that mirror, that reflection of what they've become, is not so easily escaped. You, on the other hand, no longer owe the past your energy. You've paid your dues. You've cried your tears. You've stood in your truth while others ran from theirs. And now, life is tilting in your favor. Quietly, steadily, just as it should. Because when you've built your foundation on what's real, no betrayal, no delay, no injustice can take away what's coming to you. So walk forward, not with vengeance, but with dignity. Let the balance of life unfold in its own timing, because in the end, what was lost will be restored. What was taken will be returned in a higher form. And the weight of what they did will fall exactly where it belongs, not on your shoulders, but on theirs. That is the quiet power of balance. Not loud, not instant, but inevitable.